Okay, so I'm kind of going to go a little bit fast, but I welcome questions as I go. And kind of what I want to do is really focus on understanding bias and discrimination and putting that in the context of the law in terms of how the law deals with it. So the place I'd like to start, though, with is to talk about what race is. So people get into trouble because they want to say, well, race, because race is not biological, it doesn't have meaning. And I'm like, well, no, that's not how I view it, because that's like saying, because what they typically say, and this was huge in Europe when I worked in the World Conference Against Racism in early 2000s, and the Europeans were adamant, like, we can't collect data on how different racial groups are being affected because there's only one race. And if there's only one race, how can we collect data? And they absolutely, for a long time, refused. They've come around to realizing that one biological race doesn't mean that there's one social race. And just like words have many definitions, race has many definitions. And race is a social construction, just like countries are a social construction, and money is a social construction. Neither one of those have any real meaning. America only exists politically now. Right now, today, it has real political meaning. So you can't discount something just because it's a social construction. So in the United States and the rest of the world, we have a social construction called race. That construction does have biological consequences because of not biology, but often social isolation and racism. So to get into, having said that now, my definition of racism is that it's any action that is based on prejudice, stereotypes, or biases that subordinates a group. It can be individual, me against one person. It can be institutional, an organization sets up policies and practices. It can be systemic, all of the different organizations in a system, and it can be cultural. The movies, the media, the book, all of those are ways that you can be racist. So before, I want to make a distinction, but I want to define stereotypes, biases, and prejudice, which I wish we had a separate name for racism, because I think people use it wrong, and I'll get there in a minute. But right now, we know what stereotypes are. It's a fixed and oversimplified belief about a group. And it's a stereotype because we apply it to an individual without regard to whether it's true or not. So we look at a person and we think we know what's going on with them. And we place the stereotype on them. So having stereotypes, biases, and prejudice is normal. Everybody has them. In fact, you gotta have them. There's no way to process all the information that goes on in our life without using some stereotypes, some biases, and some prejudice. The issue is whether you catch yourself and stop using it against people. So institutional racism is about systems where you have procedures and practices and patterns that have the effect of maintaining the power and the influence of another. Now, one of the discussions I get into often is people want to say, well, people have a job and they don't get to make the procedures, practices, and patterns. And I'm like, yeah, but you choose to work there. And if you're not working to change those institutional practices and patterns, then you're part of the problem, and have to wear the label of racist because you're working in an institution that is racist. Not that you have it in your head, that you act upon it. Prejudice is when you have a preconceived opinion that is, and so you have a stereotype. I'm gonna go back a minute. You have a stereotype, and that stereotype helps form a preconceived opinion, negative or positive, because it doesn't really matter. The model minority stereotype is, people think it's a positive stereotype, but if you act upon it, it's just as harmful as a negative stereotype. And biases. So in biases, we're talking about prejudice is in favor of or against a group, and it takes it another level. Stereotype, prejudice, and biases, they can be explicit and implicit. Now, we have tons of biases. They're called cognitive biases, and there are tons of them. And I highlighted some of the more frequent ones that get in the way of racial justice. Getting into cognitive biases is real important, and I'm not going to go through all of these because I just wanted to show you the wide range of biases that exist, the intergroup biases, your own race bias, and of course, stereotype. So that's one axis. The other axis now, stereotypes, biases, and prejudices, we all have them. Those don't have to translate into discrimination. So the problem becomes is when we have differences in access and quality of goods or service opportunities or outcomes. I used to tell people, I really don't care whether you have stereotypes, biases, and prejudices against Black people. As long as you don't discriminate, hey, believe what you want. The problem is people act upon it and they discriminate. And they limit the quality of goods or services or opportunities or outcomes. Sometimes, one of the things we've done in this society, which in the United States, is we've labeled things disparities. And that makes it sound like it's kind of like, oh, it just happened. But it's really about discrimination. So I want to kind of say, so how do we deal with implicit bias? Well, I think on an individual level, we all should be constantly trying to figure out what our whether a bias exists in us, and the tool that is often used is IAT, and it's not just race. They have all kind of implicit bias measures. They have colorism, and they have different racism, and I would encourage you to go there. One of the things that they have shown is that there is almost steady in-group bias against your own group. So whether you're Black, Asian, Native, gay, that they're about 30% don't like their own group. And so that's, I think, is important to remember, because when we talk about the answer to discrimination being bringing more people of color into the workplace, there is a good reason for doing that, but not necessarily getting rid of implicit bias discrimination. And thank you for inviting me, and thank you for all the work that you all are doing. I think it's really important.